The Via Appia began as a road, and it asked a larger question. When a line of stone ran out from Rome toward Capua, it did more than ease travel. It told soldiers where they could march, officials where they could carry orders, carts where they could move grain, and the communities along the route that Rome intended to return again and again. The road made distance less protective. It made southern Italy less remote from the city on the Tiber. That matters because Rome's rise in Italy was not secured by one brilliant battle, nor by one sudden decision to conquer everything in sight. It came from a slower and more practical achievement. Rome learned how to turn defeat, surrender, alliance, settlement, and movement into a repeatable structure of control. Roads belonged to that structure. So did colonies, treaties, legal grades, military obligations, and the habit of making different communities depend on Rome in different ways. This episode follows the structure through 6 questions. What problem did Rome face after it defeated the Latin communities around it and pushed south toward Campania and Samnium? How did it sort the Italian communities into different legal relationships? Why did colonies and roads make conquest last after an army had marched away? How did these arrangements become Manpower? Why did the structure survive its severest tests, from Pyrrhus and from Hannibal? And what does the phrase, "all roads led to Rome," truly mean when we look at the institutions behind the stone? One caution belongs near the beginning. Roman chronology before 300 BC stands on less secure ground than chronology after that date, and later Roman writers often arrange the early past into cleaner sequences than the evidence can fully support. That does not dissolve the whole pattern. It means that years, motives, and speeches should not be treated as if preserved with modern precision. The safer claim is also the more interesting one. By the late 4th and early 3rd centuries BC, Rome had developed a way of organizing Italy that outlasted individual campaigns. The problem began close to home. Latium was the country around Rome, full of Latin communities that shared language, cults, customs, and older traditions of cooperation and rivalry. Rome did not begin as the natural master of these towns. It had to fight them, treat with them, absorb them, and rearrange them. The decisive turn came after the Latin War, which ended in 338 BC when Rome made a permanent disposition of the Latins. The Latin League was abolished. Some communities nearest Rome were annexed outright. Others were placed under limited citizenship or under treaty dependence. That settlement matters because it shows Rome choosing variety over a single answer. A defeated town did not automatically receive the treatment of every other defeated town. Rome could take land from one community, grant full citizenship to another, give a lesser citizenship to a third, and bind a fourth by treaty. The result was not equality. It was order by gradation. Each community learned where it stood, what it owed, and how much political room it kept. The most important thing to understand is that Roman citizenship itself had grades. A modern listener hears the word citizenship and imagines one clear bundle of rights. The Roman world could divide belonging into layers. One crucial form was called civitas sine suffragio, citizenship without the vote. In plain terms, a community or a person could be brought inside the Roman civic order while still lacking full political participation at Rome. By the end of the 4th century BC, that status carried taxation and military service without the full franchise. It was a powerful instrument. It let Rome enlarge its pool of taxpayers and soldiers while withholding the highest political privileges. It could be used as punishment after defeat or as a halfway condition between foreign independence and full citizenship. The people it touched were no longer simply outsiders, for they had obligations inside the Roman order, and they were not full partners in Roman politics either. That tension was useful to Rome. It converted conquered communities into resources before it converted them into equals. Latin rights formed another grade. The phrase can confuse because it sounds as if it spoke only of people who were Latin by blood. By this period, Latin status was a legal category. It could apply to communities and colonists whose relationship to Rome rested on law rather than shared ancestry. Latin status could give important private rights, recognize dealings with Romans among them, and it remained below full Roman citizenship. It stood close enough to Rome to bind people in, and limited enough to preserve the hierarchy. Latin colonies made this clearer still. A Latin colony was not merely a group of settlers far from home. It was a formal community planted under Roman leadership or Roman influence, often at a strategic place. The colonists might be a mixture of Romans and Latins who gave up their old citizenship and became citizens of the new colonial community. Outsiders could gain Latin status by joining a colony. A colony therefore created a new local body with a civic identity of its own, while binding that body to Rome through military obligation and shared interest. Allied treaties made another layer again. Some communities remained outside Roman citizenship and Latin status altogether, yet were tied to Rome by agreements that set out duties and expectations. The treaties came in more equal and less equal forms, and the unequal form could require an ally to respect the greatness of the Roman people, to share Rome's friends and enemies, and to provide troops. The key point is simple. Rome did not need to annex every community to use its strength. A treaty could leave a town locally recognizable, while pointing its foreign policy and its manpower toward Rome. That is why the phrase Italian Confederation needs care. It serves if it means only that many Italian communities were connected to Rome. It misleads if it suggests a federal council of equal partners. Roman Italy had no multilateral federation and no representative body standing beside Rome. The ties ran one by one from each community to the Roman center. This was not a flat network. It was a series of local relationships that converged on one city. Local autonomy helped the arrangement work. Many communities kept their own magistrates, assemblies, customs, and daily administration. People could still live in towns that felt local rather than Roman in every detail. That mattered because Rome did not have to govern every market dispute, boundary argument, marriage arrangement, or local festival itself, but the decisive powers lay at the center. War, diplomacy, alliance, and the supply of soldiers pointed upward to Rome. A town might govern its own streets. It could not freely choose Rome's enemies as friends. This balance gave Roman rule its practical texture. It was not a modern nation, for the Italians did not all share one citizenship or one political voice. It was not a loose circle of friends, for the communities owed soldiers and obedience in the matters that counted most for Roman power. It was a hierarchy with local faces. The local face made it bearable. The hierarchy made it useful. Colonies gave that hierarchy a body on the land. When Rome founded a colony, it set people where Roman presence had to remain visible after the army left. A colony could guard a road, a river crossing, a coast, a valley, or a frontier country. It could watch a defeated region. It could part hostile neighbors. It could offer land to settlers and make a community whose survival depended on the Roman order around it. That is why colonies are no background scenery in this account. They are one of the ways conquest became permanent. The late 4th and early 3rd centuries BC saw a striking burst of colonial foundations. Latin colonies such as Luceria and Saticula, Sora, Alba Fusens, Carsioli and Venusia were not random dots on a map. They stood in relation to contested routes, difficult peoples, and Roman needs. Latin colonies often recruited between 2,500 and 6,000 adult male settlers, so that whole communities could be planted in strategically sensitive places. These settlements kept local autonomy, and they were liable to Roman military service. The military value was direct. Roman recruiting officers went not only to Roman citizens, but to the Latin colonies and the allied cities to raise contingents and bring armies up to strength. A colony therefore did two things at once. It held a place, and it helped supply men. It was a fortified reminder of Roman power and a future levy waiting to be summoned. That is why conquest could feed later conquest. Land taken in one war could help create the soldiers and the strongholds for the next. The social value mattered too. Confiscated land from defeated opponents could be used to settle Roman citizens who had been too poor to qualify for ordinary military service. In the Roman system, service was tied to property, for soldiers were expected to meet their military obligations according to their means. When poor citizens received land, they could become liable to serve. Colonization could therefore raise the available manpower twice over, by binding allied communities to Rome and by turning landless Romans into men who could be called to arms. The Samnite Wars made these ideas urgent. Samnium was the mountain country of the Samnite peoples in the central and southern Apennines, east and southeast of Rome. Campania lay south of Latium, rich and strategically vital, with Capua among its great prizes. To hold Campania was to reach beyond the older Latin world, and it meant moving across difficult ground, where mountains, marshes, and hostile peoples could make distance dangerous. The Second Samnite War exposed the problem sharply. After serious reverses, Rome recovered northern Campania, founded colonies there, and built the Appian Way in 312 BC as a plain sign that it meant to keep control. The physical reason was plain as well. The route south was difficult and marshy, and Rome needed a straighter road between Rome and Capua. A Roman decision in the Forum mattered more if men, supplies, and orders could actually reach the place where the decision had to be enforced. The Via Appia was therefore political stone. It began near Rome, passed through Latium, crossed hard ground, and bound the city to Campania. It shortened the practical distance between the center and the south. It gave armies a dependable route. It helped supplies move. It let Roman authority return with less delay. Such a road did not conquer by itself. It made conquest harder to undo. Roads and colonies worked best together. A road could carry an army, but a road without friendly points along its course could become exposed. A colony could hold a place, but a colony without dependable routes could become isolated. Together, they changed the map. Roads complemented and reinforced colonization. The Via Valeria running eastward, with colonies such as Carsioli and Alba Fusens near its line. The strengthening of Roman control in the Liris Valley, the approaches around Samnium, the secure link with Campania. The Liris Valley deserves a moment, or it passes as just another name. It lay between Latium and Campania, and it mattered as a corridor through contested country. Whoever held the valleys, the passes, and the routes between Rome and the south made war and supply easier for themselves and harder for their enemies. Colonies such as Sora and Fregili, and the roads that tied these zones back toward Rome, made the middle ground less open to reversal. By the beginning of the 3rd century BC, Rome had planted colonies at strategic points and opened road communications toward the Adriatic. That is a large sentence with a concrete meaning. Rome had begun to connect the western side of Italy, the central mountains, and the routes toward the eastern sea through a growing pattern of roads and settlements. Italy was not yet a Roman province, and its peoples had not become one people. But Roman decisions could move across it with greater force than before. This is where the legal order, the colonies, and the roads become manpower. Rome's treaties and graded citizenship gave the Republic immense military reserves. One scale makes the point. In 218 BC, the 30 Latin colonies could provide 80,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, while the other Italian allies could provide 250,000 infantry and 26,000 cavalry. Polybius, counting for 225 BC, gives a wider peninsula-wide figure of 730,000 infantry and more than 70,000 cavalry. Those numbers belong to different dates and different frames of counting, and they should not be added into one exact total. Their shared meaning is clear. Roman Italy held a vast reserve of men who could be reached through legal status, treaty obligation, colonial duty, and roads. Manpower was not a number of bodies somewhere in the countryside. It was men attached to obligations, and obligations attached to routes, towns, officials, and the repeated habits of command. Access was the crucial word. A community might hold thousands of potential soldiers, but potential soldiers become useful only when someone can summon them, assemble them, feed them, and place them in an army. Rome's Italian structure made routines for doing this again and again. Citizens could be levied. Latin colonies could be asked for contingents. Allies could be required to provide troops under treaty. Roads helped men and provisions reach the theater of war. The same arrangement that limited political equality made military recovery possible. Pyrrhus of Epirus tested the arrangement before Hannibal did. He came to southern Italy in 280 BC with a Greek-style professional army, elephants, and the reputation of one of the finest commanders of his age. At Heraclea and Esculum, he defeated Roman armies, though at heavy cost. In many Greek political settings, A severe defeat might move a state to negotiate from weakness, and Pyrrhus seems to have expected Rome to behave that way. Rome did not. The reason was not simple bravery. After Pyrrhus' victories, some outlying peoples did go over to him, Greeks and Lucanians and Samnites among them. Yet Pyrrhus found that Rome could still lean on the hard core of the Latins and various central Italian communities. Without defections on a great scale, he could win battles without breaking the order that produced new Roman armies. He had damaged Roman forces in the field. He had not severed the roads, the colonies, the statuses, the treaties, and the loyalties behind those forces. Hannibal tested the same structure under far worse conditions. After Cannae in 216 BC, Rome had suffered disaster on a scale that should have invited collapse. Many communities in southern Italy did defect, and the danger was real. Yet not one Latin colony defected after Cannae, and those colonies stood as reliable strongholds across Italy through the Second Punic War. That is an extraordinary fact, if we remember what colonies were. They were not decorative memories of earlier expansion. They were active anchors in a war for survival. The colonies did not prove that Roman rule was gentle or loved by everyone. They proved that enough communities were bound tightly enough, invested deeply enough, or constrained strongly enough to keep the Roman order working after catastrophe. Hannibal could defeat Roman armies. He could not of itself turn Roman Italy into a single coalition against Rome. The structure held unevenly. It held where Rome needed it most. Livy gives the harshest picture of the strain in 209 BC, after years of war had drained Italy. The meetings of Latins and allies were full of complaint that levies of men and money had exhausted them, and 12 of the 30 Latin colonies told the consuls they could provide neither soldiers nor funds. Among the refusers stood Ardea and Nepete, Sutrium, Alba, Carsioli, Sora, Susa, Circe, Sestia, Cals, Narnia, and Interamna. The Senate's alarm was not a small administrative worry. If the colonies failed, the allied structure might fail with them. Rome's strength in Italy rested on repeated compliance, and a refusal by 12 colonies raised the possibility that others would follow, and that the Italian order would stop producing the men and money that kept Rome in the war. Livy's scene shows the price of the system from the Italian side. It consumed local endurance. Yet the same scene shows the resilience. 18 colonies declared their troops ready, and more to come if needed, among them Signia and Norba, Saticulum, Brundisium, Fregili, Luceria, Venusia, Hadria, Firma, Ariminum, Pontia, Paestum, Cosa, Beneventum, Icenia, Spoltum, Placentia, and Cremona. The exact names matter less than the pattern. The structure bent under the pressure, and enough of it went on answering. That is the most honest view of Roman Italy in this period. It was extractive. It drew soldiers and money from communities that often lacked full equality with Rome. It was also durable. It preserved local identities while pointing the decisive obligations toward one city. It gave Rome soldiers after defeats, roads after conquests, colonies after settlements, and new settlements after wars. The burden was heavy, and the machinery of obligation kept working. The achievement, then, was no flawless plan laid down in advance. It was a set of habits and institutions gathered through crisis. Rome fought the Latins and rearranged Latium. It fought in Campania and Samnium and learned that roads and colonies must work together. It granted some communities citizenship, some a limited citizenship, some Latin status, and some treaty dependence. It let local life continue where that served stability, while keeping war and diplomacy pointed toward Rome. Each layer strengthened the others. A treaty gave Rome a claim on a community's soldiers. A road helped those soldiers and their supplies move. A colony protected a route and made another source of men. A legal grade said what a community owed and what it did not receive. A local magistracy kept daily government familiar, while the highest decisions moved through Roman hands. No one of these parts was enough alone. Together, they made Roman recovery unusually likely. So the phrase "all roads led to Rome" is true in more than the literal sense. The Via Appia led to Rome. So did Latin rights. So did citizenship without the vote. So did the allied treaties, and the colonies planted in contested country, and the levies sent from towns that kept their own names while owing their most important service to the Roman center. Rome did not merely conquer Italy and then possess it. Rome organized Italy so that roads, laws, settlements, and obligations carried strength back toward the city. By the time greater enemies came, Rome had built something harder to destroy than an army. It had built a way to replenish power.